I'd like to call the Parks meeting for May 2018 to order. And first, I'd like a motion for approval of the minutes from April.
I move that we approve the minutes from March.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have,
It says March, but maybe it's April.
yeah, it should be April. Isn't that right, Debbie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well then make it April.
Uh-oh. Techno, I like that.
Why did you answer it?
I answered and hung up. So, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for April. All in favor, say aye.
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 The minutes are approved. Interested citizens, we have a couple people out here. Do you want to speak on anything other than what's on the agenda?
We're just here to reacquaint ourselves with the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Okay,
gonna run for the board, right?
okay, so let's get to new business. The first thing we have is review the parks rules and regulations. Robert.
I'm going to give this one over to Shannon.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shannon Johnson.
You had to check your boy.
It's a pleasure being here. I don't get to go to the Parks Board very often, so I told Bill that I thought maybe I ought to come to this one since I did a lot of these revisions, and I'm not sure how the chair would like to handle this. We want to just go through the order. I don't, if you all had a chance to read my little staff report, I don't need to reiterate that, I think I just covered a couple of high points there. So I thought that we would just kind of go through it in order if there's no objections and just see if there's any particular questions you might have. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. Well, let me just touch base on it. One of the things I've been talking to Bill, and frankly it's been going on so long, to Rob Kistler before Bill, is to confirm that we could have an area of the park, not a whole park and not like a gazebo or the amphitheater, that could be reserved or rented, similar to what we used to do with the River Fair. Is that what it was called? With a section of Keizer Rapids that was used, for example. So the way that we handle that has changed, and add the words park area there so that the director, meaning the Public Works Director, can have a list of areas that would be appropriate to have. And rather than try to put those in the ordinance, have that to be an administrative list that the director can say, you know, that makes sense or doesn't make sense to make available on a rented basis. So those were the changes in section 7. So why don't I stop there and make sure there weren't any other questions before that. The rest were just basically, up to that section, were basically just kind of verbiage changes. So were there any questions on that part of it? No? Okay. The next section that has anything substantive in it, well, again, in section 7, I made it clear that it's just as a technical matter. If you have conditions connected with the permit, you don't actually physically get the permit issued until you meet those conditions. That's in case you know, like a big deal where we have to get insurance or something like that. If the city doesn't get the insurance, we've approved your permit, but we haven't granted your permit until you actually receive it. So that was language in the other part of section 7. The section 9 changes it, well, actually it doesn't change it. It clarifies what's current policy about the amphitheater, that it can be used on a first come, first served basis if not previously reserved. And then I guess I need to stop there because the question came up and I talked to Bill Lawyer about, and this is maybe the first decision point for the board. Do you want to consider having that same first come, first served language at Clyde Creek Park with the gazebo, which is, I mean, in my opinion, kind of obvious. I mean, if no one's reserving it, I would assume somebody would be able to use it, but I didn't add that language in there yet, I believe. Let me go to that section. Right, because the issue, it really hadn't come up with anything else, so I just put it in the Keizer Rotary Amphitheater. We could, if you want, add another section to make that clear with regard to the gazebo, if that makes sense to you folks.
Shannon,
Uh-huh.
that doesn't mean that somebody can go down there and have a band and do whatever.
No, and if you read that part of the section, the part in blue in section 9, that's on page 11, it says first come, first served basis, et cetera, et cetera. Any amphitheater event involving electrical service use, amplified sound, or projection of pictures must get a permit. So, yeah, I mean, you can show up, you can have a little birthday party or whatever if it's not reserved. And I assume that that's what you wanted to do, but that language is not in there yet, so if you want that, you need to kind of let me know. If that,
Well, I mean,
we'll
it
stop
sounds good.
there.
to me.
Is
I
there-
just wanted to,
Yeah.
bring that out, that somebody can't come
Right.
down there and just throw a big shindig.
It should be spelled out specifically if that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is, right here.
See it?
So, I had a lady call me yesterday, and another one called me a week ago, and they wanted to reserve the volleyball court. Not so much that, they wanted to reserve the
Picnic.
kiosk there, that they could have a party out there, and they were
The
told.
picnic shelter.
Picnic shelter,
Oh, okay.
they were told they can't do that.
Right, currently, that's not, now,
So
let me,
what I suggested to her to do,
Mhm.
well, what they told her to do, you can't reserve that because it's,
not reservable.
no, that's not what they said. They said you can't reserve it because it's for volleyball players.
Oh,
Well, she says, well, that's what we're coming down there to do is play
Ah.
volleyball, but we want to have a food in addition. So then when I turned around and said, why don't you go to the patio at the amphitheater, which is going to be nicer probably anyway, and have your party there.
Yeah.
And still play that. So, but that's the second person that's called me that said that they can't reserve it.
yeah, and if I could, before we go to Matt, if that's okay, Mr. Chair, is that would be something that Bill Lawyer could decide as director, okay, that makes sense to allow to reserve, for example. And then, so after these regulations are in place, that's something that Bill could make a decision in his position as, does that make sense? And I think, from talking to Bill, I think that he'd probably be conversing with you and Robert, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing. Maybe it wouldn't be a formal park board approval, but you'd probably have input into that. But I don't know if Matt had a follow-up on the same question.
Mr. Chair, so I'm trying to remember back because it's been over a year. As I recall, related specifically to that shelter, one of the things that was discussed was that that shelter would not be a permitted reservable area because of the way it was done and how it was structured to be exclusively used for the volleyball purposes. But I also remember that, if I recall correctly, that the volleyball stuff in general wasn't going to be a reserved thing. Am I
No,
correct on that?
You can probably help better. I kind of only vaguely remember it, Robert.
So I remember the discussion regarding the sand volleyball courts themselves not being reservable, simply because the idea was we didn't want a whole bunch of out-of-towners showing up and just constantly reserving this thing, and then here you are, a local kid wanting to come down and play, and you don't have access to your own backyard court, right? I don't remember how far in depth the conversation went with the shelter, other than the shelter was simply built for support of the courts. So they're technically separate, yet they're side by side, and one was built to support the other. So
Yeah, I mean, I seem to recall that one of the wishes that the family that donated that particular piece was that it would fall sort of in the same guidelines as the
Yeah.
sand volleyball court itself.
yeah, I
Yeah.
tend to agree.
Non-reservable.
Yeah.
I agree with what you were saying, Matt. When I talked to Hans about it, the impression I got from him was that it was to be, not set aside for the volleyball, but part of that structure. So if somebody wanted to come in and have a little picnic there and nobody was using it, of course they could. But not reservable.
So it doesn't really answer much by way of a question, but
So is there anywhere in that ordinance that specifies those rules, or is that something that we need to discuss and see if we need to add it on there?
With regard to the sand
the
volleyball or
volleyball-
the other issue?
To the volleyball court
Well,
in
I
the
think that
covered area.
that's a little bit awkward. Let's assume that we pass, this goes on to council and you pass the regulations. The way that would work is Bill Lawyer would be the one making the decision. So, I mean, like I said, I assume that Bill would take input from you folks and Robert, but that would ultimately be Bill's decision. So if Parks Board thought, hey, gee, Bill, we think this should or shouldn't be, I mean, I kind of remember like Robert does about the sand volleyball part.
There just seems to be kind of a confusion. So would it be like us needing to issue a recommendation to Bill to consider that?
Right. And that's kind of up to Bill how he handles that with regard to Robert and you folks. What I didn't want to get into was Parks Board changes over in members, and then we have, oh, this is reservable and this isn't because we have a vote for it. And so I decided that that made sense to just put as an administrative decision. But before we forget, I assume there's no reason why we shouldn't clarify that the gazebo and the other one, I mean, obviously they can be used on a first come, first served basis if they're not reserved. Okay, well, I'll make that change then. And that's on section 9. Did you have something?
well, I just had a question, because this is specific, section 9 specifically as it relates to entertainment. So entertainment's a rather broad category. So the thought then, as I understand it, is somebody could affect the same kind of entertainment at either the gazebo or Claggett Creek or any of the other generally reservable areas. Is that
Right.
what you're leading towards?
Right.
Because otherwise, it's a first come, first served basis. And I think that's established in 7, if I recall.
Right. Hang on a second, let me switch back to 7 too. I think probably what I'm gonna wanna double check with Bill on, but, that thing about the amphitheater ending up in section 9, I think, Matt, you have a good point. That's just because of where it ended up.
Well, in section 6,
Because we wanted to make that point. But I think the broader point is that you don't get exclusive use unless you have a permit. Okay, so if you want, it's like these folks with the sand volleyball thing. They could have just taken the risk and showed up and nobody was using it. But they wanted, it was a big deal to them. They wanted to make sure they could use that. If it is reservable, then it shouldn't matter really whether it's entertainment or not, is what I think that I want to make sure is in there, so. But I'm not sure that was your point, Matt?
well,
I think it was opposite.
no, I just think that, so in section 5, you've got special uses, and then the section 6 talks about exclusive uses, and then you go into the permit and procedures process, and then you go into the entertainment. So I think it's a little bit confusing. I think the entertainment, is more specifically, as I read it, it was more specifically applicable to Keizer Rotary Amphitheater because of the unique nature of that facility, whereas any of the other parks sort of fall under section 5 and section 6, being being that if you're going to use them and have specific access to them, then you do have to go through that permitting process. But there's not really anything in there that lends itself to being first come, first served for those. Other than just the general, hey, if you're there and you're using it and somebody has the permit, they have the right to the facility as a condition of that permit. But I don't see that being, I don't know how that would apply specifically to section 9 for the entertainment portion. So I think 9 is pretty exclusive to the Keizer Rotary Amphitheater, whereas 5, 6, and 7 are more exclusive to the rest of the system.
Right. Well, I think the idea behind the original language in section 9 basically says, look, you can't have an exhibition, play, entertainment, dance, or whatever
Right.
in any park, and theoretically somebody could. They could say, well, hey, come on down to Bob Newton Park and we're going to have a little concert. And I think the idea is like, you need to have a permit for that first. Regardless of whether or not you want to reserve it and have exclusive use or not. And the reason for that is, not to get too bureaucratic, is that, you end up having an event, and with social media nowadays, all of a sudden you have 100 people, 200 people show up, and that can cause issues that we need to deal with in advance. And that's the reason for it. So I agree that it's probably mostly would be Keizer Rotary Amphitheater, but it could be another park too, and that's the reason that language is. This provision about Keizer Rapids Park, open, if not reserved, first come, first serve, it just got stuck here because of that connection that you're talking about, Matt. I'm not sure it belongs there as far as format-wise, so I might look at moving that, but.
Dylan had a question.
Now I have two. The first one is, I'm looking for it, and wasn't the language somewhere in here about an event that could reasonably attract 50 or more people? I'm just
Right.
missing it? Okay.
No, it's in there, and I'm trying to remember where that is too. I think it's later on. I should have tried to tab this, but I think the concept is, it doesn't matter whether you're reserving it or not. If you're doing an event with a certain number of people, that's going to cause concerns.
Is that because a lot of these are in neighborhood parks?
Well, even at Keizer Rapids Park, but yes, certainly in neighborhood parks.
Right.
That could be.
So 7.2 has a threshold of 100.
Which one?
Section 7.
I thought it was in
paragraph 2.
section 7. Okay.
That has a threshold of 100, but I do recall seeing the 50 as well, Dylan. I'm just trying to remember where it was.
Yeah, sorry, I saw it now. I don't know where to find it, but
But remember that all of this is by permit from the director. So,
no.
Not that.
That's actually what we're talking about. Is
broad.
that you could just show up and say, hey, I'm going to play my guitar in the park,
I think
and then
it
all of a
has the
sudden you have an
100 and
attendance of
7 too.
50 people, and that's when we're saying you need to get a permit. You don't need to permit to play your guitar in the park if you're only going to.
9(2). Says director may issue a permit for an event described in 9(1).
Yes.
If it's found that the use will not likely interfere with the enjoyment, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of covered.
Right. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Second question.
We can scratch it. It's not important.
Shannon?
It does appear somewhere else. You're right. And because this section talks specifically about a permit, there's another section that talks about a non-permit situation, and we'll find it here in a moment.
Shannon, in regards to the sand volleyball and the covered area, do we need, if we choose to make a recommendation to the Public Works Director, or
I'm going to leave that up to Bill and Robert and you folks going forward. I don't think you need to decide that tonight on how that should work. That'll be up to you folks kind of generally. Ultimately, unless the ordinance gets changed, it's Bill's decision. In terms of the format of kind of where that starts with or not, I'm going to leave it to him.
is that because of it isn't formulated enough with staff yet?
Yeah, I
That
think
if we made a
that's
recommendation, it's
right.
like telling staff, this is what you're gonna do, and that's
Right.
beyond our scope.
that was my thought on it.
I actually remembered my
Oh,
second question.
Dylan has a question. He remembered what it was now.
This is a third question.
Oh, it's the
But,
third
so we're getting rid of
But
number
who's
2.
counting?
On to number 3. So, was the situation with like the amphitheater and the gazebo, are those specifically designated as reservable? And so with the sand volleyball courts, in order to just keep it from being reserved, we just didn't ever make it reservable in order to respect the wishes of the donating family?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we wanted to continue to leave it open for just first come, first serve, we would just not list it as reservable. Or is that the question? Do we want to make any section of any park reservable? That was not what was being asked? Okay.
No, the point was to, right now, it's unclear what you can reserve or not reserve. And so this makes it clear, not really totally clear, it makes it clear that there will be a list that will be administratively generated by the director. And, you know, he can revisit that from time to time on taking things off or adding things in terms of facilities or areas of the park that make sense. I don't think you want to just wide open because, you know, there's too much analysis that goes into, is this going to be a problem or not? So,
And that includes him making exceptions, right?
pardon?
That includes him making exceptions for a one-time event.
Yes, I think that he'd be within the rights under the new language to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I found it.
Where is it?
So I found our section 4.3, no person
There
or
it
entity may organize, advertise, or invite participation for any gathering, activity, or event that may reasonably attract 50 or more participants.
Yeah, that was my new language. I actually added that really late because it occurred to me that the other language didn't cover that eventuality.
It doesn't show up
You
in
know,
your
I don't know
list.
what they call about flash mobs or whatever these social media things are, where somebody does something on their phone, and all of a sudden there's a big group of people, and that's why I added that
Have
language.
we ever had a time when something got out of hand? You know, in a park where there was too many people
Not,
and basically.
not yet. I mean,
Well, you know, it's basically neighborhood parks is where we're concerned, I would think, because now you're affecting
I've seen where 2 or 3 groups show up.
in a neighborhood park.
Well, no, I'm more or less talking like at the Keizer Rapids.
For
I
two or
think
three
you're
people.
talking about conflicting of
Well,
reserve.
like for instance, the patio that we built at the amphitheater.
Right.
It's all enclosed in trees in the summertime. I've seen times where 3 different groups are down there and they're arguing who's gonna get to use it.
Well, whoever's there first.
Well,
But no
yeah, it's
individual
always
group
hard to
would.
tell who got there first.
some people do. They bring a couple pieces of deal at 3 or 2 o'clock and reserve it for,
Couple chairs.
yeah, and put a few things down there.
It's not a parade.
Yeah.
But that is a reservable area, isn't it, that patio?
Yes.
Yeah. So-
It's reservable, but if it's not reserved, then it's first come, first served.
So
Okay. So with the number 100 and then the number 50, would it be advisable to maybe have it all be either 50 or 100 to avoid confusion?
I just picked that randomly.
Okay.
And there wasn't wasn't a lot of thought behind it. The idea is in the section 7 permit is like, look, if it doesn't matter whether or not there's alcohol or there's amplified sound, if it's over 100 people and you want to reserve it, you need to get a permit. The other part was, it doesn't matter if you have a reserved thing or not. It's just anytime you have a group more than 50 people. And the reason I guess I picked the lower amount is because, I mean, people can misjudge or be dishonest about, well, I don't think it's going to have 100 people. So I made it lower with the idea that, you know, if you had a group that somebody, I mean, they'd have to actually lie if they thought it was going to be more than 50. Doesn't matter to me. If you want to make
They're
them,
not with us.
if you want to make them both 50 or both 100 or 150 and 100 or change the numbers whatsoever, I wouldn't advise going higher than 100. But
Well, is it-
those are just random thoughts.
I'm getting back to the neighborhood park thing. That's our biggest concern, and I
Right.
think any group over 50, then you're starting to impact.
And Jen, I'm really glad you brought that up. I thought about briefly, and it's been a couple months ago when I was first working on this, and I finally got it done, about trying to make a distinction between the parks. And I decided, and you folks may decide differently, and that's fine, I don't care. I didn't want to make it too complicated. I didn't want to have different numbers for different parks. But there is some logic to saying what's the right word for it, regional? Does he still use that word? The Claggett and Keizer Rapids?
Well,
There is some logic in
Figure
making
that
those
out.
numbers different, I suppose. I just didn't, I thought about that idea, and I thought, I don't want to make it complicated. I want to keep it as simple as can.
there are times when I've seen at Claggett, when I know there was way over 50 people for a big family event or something.
soccer games.
Yeah.
Well, soccer, I don't think soccer games would, yeah, that,
Oh,
that
yeah,
is
they
nice. What if
do.
they had
I
a
thought they
soccer game
reserved
and you had
Yeah.
a bunch of people?
Soccer and a couple other sports that take place on that field, fill out a reservation form for the field, knowing that
Okay.
they're going to have at times maybe a couple teams showing up and you'll have more than 50 people.
Well, am I correct that a lot of times big family events down there, there's well over 50 people?
I would say at times for the shelter reservations, if they do a large family reunion, you could draw over 50 people.
But
But
if they have it
But they can
reserved,
reserve
that,
Have a reservation.
that's a different,
And I've approved the reservation and they've put down on a piece of paper the amount of people they thought it would draw, and they're usually pretty honest.
Matt.
So, switching hats, when I do events for the Clay Creek Watershed Council, we often draw for large events in terms of cleanups well over 50 people. In fact, the last probably 3 that we've done, we've had numbers in the 70s. So under this section 4, paragraph 3, I would then, as the chair, have to obtain a permit for every one of my events, just in case I go over 50.
Well, not to split hairs like most lawyers, but if you reasonably expected that it would attract more than 50, not that it does occasionally, but okay, I've had these events before and they've always been over 50,
Right.
yes. But if they're, how many of them go over 50? How
Well,
often?
So for example, in the last, in the 2 Rotary Arboretum plantings, both of those have had over 70.
Yeah, okay.
When we do our big ones at KRP, where we do the invasive species and things like that, we tend to operate between the 50 and 60 range. As it continues on, so for example, when we do the Civic Center cleanup, we had over 120 people here.
So, and by the way, the Civic Center itself is not the park.
No,
that's the
but
park.
when it goes
But
to Trommel's Drum,
but,
yeah.
but that might be one reason, going back to your question about the numbers, you could just change that number to 100. If you
Well,
felt,
And
if
a
you don't,
smaller
if you
park
felt
would
that
be good.
50 was too low and you weren't concerned about
But
a
we're
group of 70.
What Matt's talking about is volunteer work.
Yeah.
It doesn't distinguish it.
Yeah, but I don't know that you want to get
Crowd.
into the distinction of that. I mean, then you're going to say, well, wait a minute, what kind of group do you have? Well, is it volunteers or is there money? I mean, the main idea is you have a group of people. Maybe you need to think about traffic. Maybe you need to think about bathrooms. Maybe you need to think about just communication.
day.
Hey, this group is going to be there, so that folks know about it in case, what if they're planning something else there? So
Like a wedding.
Is something like what he's talking about, that Bill could waive it and say, this is a work, and leave it up to Bill?
That'd be
Or
hard.
That would, in my opinion, have too much discretion, and I don't know how he makes the distinction. Like, your thing doesn't need a permit, and something with the same number of people does, and I think that we'd be subject to some criticism there.
And what is the cost of a permit?
$25 for the application fee, and I mean, it depends on what you're doing. I mean,
And those fees can be waived.
not the application fee.
Not the application fee.
I mean, it seems inane to me that we have a group that is going to do volunteer work to improve the park, and they have to have an application fee and a permit. It just seems
Yeah.
a little,
Yeah, and that, so you had 2 different events there. So one might be, I mean, if you're doing work in the park, I mean, I could see that being different.
Could we exclude city-approved volunteer efforts? Something
As-
along
as
that
long
line?
as-
well, I don't
Yeah.
think Shannon wanted to do that, though.
Well, I wasn't tracking what Matt was saying in terms of exactly what the event was.
These are cleanup
So,
efforts. These are not.
I mean,
So when we did the Soggy Day, we had the permits, we did everything right. But every other event, for the most part, is
right.
a volunteer cleanup or
It's
some
a
sort
work
of
event.
work effort.
yeah, we can look at that.
Get a break.
So
That-
and it's just it's one of those deals where I want Boy Scouts now. Granted, I think for the camperall and everything, they have the permits and everything like
Yeah.
that. But we don't know. I mean,
Now,
any-
let me jump in. as used to be in scouts for a lot there. That isn't just a volunteer effort, though.
Right.
They're not there to volunteer. So to me, the fact that they do volunteer when th're doing their camporee or camperall, because I did that for years, that would require a permit regardless. I mean, the main purpose of the event is not to volunteer. They do that as a payback
Right.
kind of thing.
Value-added benefit.
So I have a suggestion, because it seems like we're kind of stuck on neighborhood versus like Keizer Rapids. I don't know, somewhere in the back of my mind, I think we dropped the whole regional park thing. But anyway, my suggestion is that we adopt what we have here as a general rule. And then if you want to list specifically, you know, what kinds of parks, like Keizer Rapids almost always needs a permit of some kind for a gathering. Or what's the little park in the middle of the neighborhood over here with the bad volleyball court, bad basketball court? Anyway, but yeah, a small neighborhood park doesn't require, or would not be allowed to have a reservable group come in. Northview. So I'm just thinking, add an additional list being specifically saying which park is going to be able to be reserved for larger groups and which ones are not at all. So Claggett would be, Keizer Rapids would be, and then below that, the smaller neighborhood parks would not be a reservable area, period. Might clear
That's
some of the
I mean,
fog.
you could certainly go that direction. The way I wrote it was sort of for maximum flexibility for the Public Works Director to figure out, you know, this makes sense and doesn't make sense, and maintain a list that would not be set in stone at all, but that he could adjust. I don't know that you'd want to necessarily say you can't reserve any neighborhood park or any portion of neighborhood park. I am trying to remember, other than Claggett, which is reservable, do we have other like major picnic shelter areas in some of the other parks, in the neighborhood parks, that somebody might, I mean, we don't allow it now,
Have
but we
tables.
might in the future want to.
Not the same size, but we do have other picnic shelters that I have oftentimes had phone calls about.
Bob Newton
And-
Park.
Bob Newton is one of them. Willamette Manor's the other.
Yeah, and you know, part of the reason, going back to the sand volleyball court, from my perspective, even if the donor didn't kind of have the wishes he wanted about that, it is an administrative, an extra administrative burden on the city to manage those
know.
reservations.
I know.
I really don't think we want to get in a situation where we have to hire a part-time person to just do that, because we have here, and all of these questions coming in. So that's part of the struggle there too.
Clint?
What about Keizer Little League?
What about it? Keizer Little League has its own rules.
Okay, so it doesn't, this
I'll-
wouldn't pertain
No.
the way this is written up, like on the cleanup?
No, that's under the park that's under the park management agreement with the manager of the park, which is now Keizer Little League. Yeah, the only thing that is connected directly here is it does have the same language, which is also in the management agreement, that it is first come, first served if it's not being used. So I mean, that is not a closed park. If it's not being used by Little League or one of the other reserved users, it is open. But other than that, no, it isn't open for reservations.
Well, it can't be used for an organized event from another, in other words, somebody can't go in there and, well, it's not being used, let's have a tournament. They can't do that. But all that stuff goes through KLO.
That goes through KLO.
Dara?
Yeah, so kind of going back to Matt's point, are your events part of the city, or is it like independent of the city?
So, Mr. Chair, the function of the Clag Creek Watershed Council, we have 3 jurisdictions that we operate in: Marion County, Keizer, and Salem. So we have our own insurance. We function completely independent of the city of Keizer. However, a majority of the projects we do are on city of Keizer property, and do benefit the parks generally in the city.
Okay. So do you have like like an MOU with the city, or is it something that's just kind of as it comes up, you do?
No,
'Cause
I
it
mean,
seems
there's
like-
nothing official in terms of
Okay.
an MOU. You know, we do have staff support in terms of the environmental services staff, and park staff that aid us as it comes to some of these things, but we
Yeah.
haven't gone as far as, any sort of MOUs.
Because I just think that that's something that's important, and especially for the like the health of the parks that we have and that we oversee. And if having that limitation will like keep you from doing the work that you're doing in our parks, then it might not be this might not be the appropriate area to address the projects that you're doing. Or if it is, it would be good to have like a clause that says, you know, unless it's for the like a park cleanup or a city approved event that cleans a park. Because if that's what you're doing in there, then it would suck that if we put something in here that's limiting you from doing those things, then it would kind of be against the welfare of the park. So, don't know if that's something we want to consider, is maybe if we can put a clause in there that says unless it's like an event that will that's like city approved to clean up the park or something around those
And that's what
terms.
I had in mind, is something along the lines of what Jim was talking originally.
Yeah.
It would have to be something where it was like cleaning up the park, though,
Yeah.
not like an
'Cause-
appreciation day
yeah,
for
'cause, like-
members or something
like
like
for
that,
the
because then it wouldn't be fair to other people.
Yeah, and if we start getting into like really specifics, like I'm thinking about the Wallace House Park, there's gonna be a picnic area, a shell-covered area that's gonna come up there soon. And so we're gonna have to be updating that all the time, every time we do park improvements, and it's gonna be a lot of work, not just for us, but for the staff. And so I like the point about leaving it open and up to the flexibility, and maybe just adding something about cleaning the park, because that's something that's for the well-being of the park itself. And it would keep Matt from having to go through all those like loopholes and stuff like that.
Shannon, how do we get that language in here?
Oh, I was going to mention, it's just easier for me unless you want to wordsmith it, is for me to just take the concept and run with it, and I'll get the language in later.
I mean, that's,
And it's up to you on how fast this wants to go. I mean, this has taken forever. And I apologize, this has been kicking around for a long time. We had a draft and just never got back to it. What drove this was the issue with the smoking. And it was like, okay, now we're changing the park regulations. This is the time to finally get this done. And so we went back rather than do a one-off for just the smoking. That's why we're doing it this way. So back to your point, if the board wishes to, you could just put this off. You know, I'll take my notes from this meeting, talk to Bill and Robert, and come back next meeting if you wish. Or you can just say, yeah, we don't really want to look at it again, and say, you know, this is the general concept to send to council. Totally fine either way. Like I said, it's taken a long time, so I don't mind waiting a little longer. If you guys don't, I don't know with the timing with regard to the smoking ban, if you feel like we're getting to a spot where you want to really push that to council, then I'd just like to take all the regulations there. If you don't mind waiting another month, that's fine too.
well, that would be my thought, is to wait, but I'm one of,
Do we have to make a official motion for that?
Well, I do the planning commission all the time, and it depends on what the substantive language is. When they make a recommendation for council, a lot of times we'll be doing these wordsmithing and like this, and they'll come to a concept part, and they'll say, yeah, we move you recommend this to council, but we want you to make adjustments there, and we direct staff to just sort of do that. This is a pretty long document, though, and we've worked on it for a while. I think you may want to look at the exact language at another meeting so you know exactly what you're recommending.
I do want to have you do something and
And
then
then bring it
look
back?
at it
Okay.
again. But I want to make sure that we're considering people who use the parks when we're looking at this. Most people, I get lots of emails through the foundation page, and I forward them to Robert because I don't know. And they're all wanting to know if XYZ part of a park could be reserved. Is there going to be some kind of a list on the website? of
That's what I would envision.
reserved? That way, it's very frustrating this first come, first serve, like Clint said, people come at, dark 30 in the morning and put down 5 little pieces of whatever, and they're coming at 3 in the afternoon. I'm thinking people planning weddings, planning birthday parties, planning family reunions, et cetera, may not be a big group, but they still want to make sure they have an area of the
Right.
park. And it's really difficult from their perspective to make plans if we're going to go with the first come, first serve.
Right.
So I think it's important that we, not maybe in this document, but attached to this document, create something that says, this is why these need to be reserved. This is why this is a non-reservable, because we can't expect anybody to have a small group in this park. So like, there's 2 different parks types. One that can accommodate groups, small or large, one that just can't accommodate groups at all. So I just try to think about the public's perception rather than, I mean, I understand that internally we have to think about how hard it is to conduct it, but sometimes having specific language helps that too.
Okay.
You got all that, Shannon?
Well, again, I think that that's going to be something that you're probably going to want to discuss with Bill. I think what you're talking about, Donna, and exactly what you said would be something that wouldn't be in this document, but
Right.
would be an explanation connected with the list, so people, I mean, the people, and who knows, I'm having a hard time thinking of any, but you folks more familiar with the parks might. You know, X picnic shelter, at the bottom of the list, it'll say, X picnic shelter is not available to reserve, and this is why, I think is what you're getting at.
Right.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
would be something Bill and Robert could work on.
Okay, that would be fine. I just, looking at it from the public's perspective, they're wanting to plan something and they come to the city through the foundation website because that's the one they hit, and they're wanting to reserve something so that they can make plans. So if they had access to a list or something.
Right.
anyway.
Matt?
So I have a couple questions followed up with, that may or may not follow up with another question. So the city hired 2 additional park staff, and they're generally going to be working your typical 9 to 5 type shift, is that correct?
Yeah.
So we don't have anything generally on the weekends or on the week, in the evenings during the week?
Not for those 2 positions.
Okay. So in terms of the enforcement of any type of permit or otherwise exclusive use as a result of the permit is covered under what and by how?
Generally speaking, when we have like shelters reserved, it's kind of on a hit and miss, but I will have one of our temps who has been working for us and trained up and understands how this operates come in and post the reservation, and oftentimes I'll have them come back in between reservations and make sure that the transition is smooth between one group and another.
Even on the weekend?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, even on a weekend. If I know it's just one reservation on a Saturday morning, then we'll usually just post it on a Friday night, make sure the shelter's nice and clean at the end of the day and call it good. If there's 3 or 4 on the weekend, then I'll use the other scenario. Now, when the splash fountain's open, which is open Saturday and Sunday through the summer, I have that person who's operating the splash fountain oversee our reservations. So that person is here on the weekends, and again, that is a temp
So
hire.
operating on a first come, first served basis, if there's a party in a reserved area prior to somebody coming into their reserved time, and they go, sorry, we were here first.
It would be posted. There should be a sign up.
Well, right.
We
but
would have a
everybody
sign up.
follows signs, right?
Well, I mean,
Being a
at
little
least you'd have
facetious,
something to
but-
point at, unless they tore it down.
Right. Well, my point is, though, I mean, if the sign's been moved or
Gotta
torn
take
down or
them out.
otherwise,
Mhm.
I mean,
Gone
what's
missing.
their recourse? None, really.
Not really.
They could come back and ask for their permit fees
Mhm.
and everything else
And
like
we
that.
would,
So I'm asking because I've actually personally experienced this, and it was problematic. And I am a little bit personally hesitant on wanting to add a whole bunch of extra sort of reservable areas, just because
More to police.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's more to police, it's more staff time, it's more more and more and more and more and more. I mean, I'd really be interested to see, how much better we can do with what we've got now versus trying to open up Pandora's box a little bit. I mean, obviously, if it's a single-use thing, and the director says, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna chart off this particular section of Bob Newton Park because Jane and Johnny want to get married there because it was their favorite part to play in the sandbox," and that's one thing. But creating a whole separate list of reservable areas, I can see being slightly problematic in terms of a enforcement and otherwise issues.
Okay. You ready to move on? Any more questions on the reservable part?
I think I think,
Okay.
because you're gonna come back with.
Yeah, we'll come back with
so-
that. I added the language about the smoking ban. I think I took that more or less from your guys' meeting in section 14.
Skip through that real quick. Oh,
So the language about vaping, is that included in this? Because,
No, I had it in another one, but I don't see it here, so we do want to add that.
okay, thank you.
And I think it was all tobacco products, if I recall.
Yeah.
Right, but
Vaping is,
I actually don't know enough about vaping, but I did notice, so it just says, no person may ignite or smoke any tobacco, tobacco product, legal or illegal drugs of any type, or any other material in any area of any park or park facility.
so that would include vaping, but it doesn't say.
I don't know,
It doesn't
is
say anything
vaping
about a
always
heated
tobacco?
element, or
Yeah.
and
Wanted to.
not all vapes have tobacco.
correct. They have
Some
all
are
kinds of
just
things.
nicotine.
I'll make
Yeah.
sure we add vaping,
Yep,
Okay.
okay?
And I think
you better be specific.
chewing tobacco is also part of it, correct?
Well, that'd
Thank
be
you.
tobacco product.
Well, no, I did not understand your original motion to include chewing. Is that supposed to be included?
We did not talk about that.
That's what I thought.
Maybe I'm thinking 2 motions ago then.
Well,
It has to do with the intrusion of secondhand smoke, so
yeah,
chewing
I mean,
does not fall
are
under
we gonna
that.
have a lip monitor?
Do
We-
you,
let's go
want to go
back
down
to-
this path, Jim?
No, I
Back
don't.
to that, yeah.
Can we please? I don't know that.
That thou shalt spit in your own hat?
I don't think we made any suggestion one way or the other on chewing tobacco.
The original motion was all use of all tobacco products in the original motion that went to the sign and everything else and
I'm fine with that.
prior to the public hearing, whatever. I don't care one way or another, but I recalled that as being part of the discussion. So
Aside from the term vaping not being in here, I think it's fine as is.
look at you, Jim. You can keep your nasty habit.
Just put in there smoke
No, it says
or
tobacco
use.
product.
I know. I was
No, but
thinking
you only
about
choose
Says
it.
ignite or smoking.
Just
You
use
only
or
choose on the
smoke.
end of it.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
We can get a big old chaw down there and go to the park.
There you go.
And it could be a danger to,
Okay, yeah,
to
that's a good point.
the dogs too.
I'll go ahead and jump on to the next section, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Oh,
Section
come on.
15 is just matching up with current practice with regard to insurance, and it wasn't really clear in there before in terms of alcohol issues with both OLCC and insurance issues. Basically, this just reiterates what we're doing currently.
Well, what's different about this?
Well, right now, the regulations don't specify something that we have been doing, we've done for the community center too, with regard to the licensing.
Right.
And I promised Mark Keizer, and I will do that separate from this because it's broader than just the amphitheater parks, it's this location too, to revisit our rules, which some people have accused us of being too restrictive in terms of not really insurance, but OLCC licensing. And I really don't want to get into that unless you really want to be bored.
We don't want to do that.
So we are going to revisit that separately because I'm committed to being as user-friendly as we can. But you have to remember that my position is to try to protect the city. And so when it comes to insurance issues, alcohol and OLCC, I'm pretty strict. And some people, we've had people in the past, you probably don't want to get me started, that basically say, well, wait a minute, we have insurance, why do we require, and this is broader than just alcohol, why do we require other people to get extra insurance when they have a big event? For example, if you have a wedding or something here at the community center, you have to get it, not just a certificate of insurance, but what's called an additionally named insured,
Well, and
which-
that protects the city.
and that protects the city. But the answer to that question about, well, don't we already have insurance to cover us on that? Our kind of insurance here at the city ain't like your guys' insurance.
No.
We have what's called a retro plan, which is basically if we have a claim against us, we pay a big chunk of money on that claim up to a maximum. And I don't know what that maximum is, but, well, no, it's not that much. But we pay a lot of money. And some of you might recall how many years ago was it that the tree fell in Meadows Park and took out part of that house?
More than 10.5 years ago.
Is that long?
It was before I started working here.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that long ago.
That,
I thought it was
fortunate.
like 5 years ago.
Yeah, me too,
you
Jim.
guys are old.
Fortunately, no one was hurt. They weren't there, but it took out a chunk of the house on the north side of Meadows Park. Well, there was some evidence that maybe we should have been paying attention to that tree. We could argue one or the other that somebody wouldn't. The point is they had a claim against the city, and it was arguably a decent claim. The insurance company paid out a big chunk of money for repairing that house. And we paid a big chunk of that money back. So the fact that we have insurance doesn't mean we don't get hit if there's a claim.
Well,
Sizable
but
deductible.
It's
part
not
of
like a $500 deductible, okay?
part of that, the insurance, tell me if I'm correct here, the insurance company comes back and says, well, you were negligible in not taking care of this.
Yeah.
So you need to pay a certain.
It doesn't
point."
matter, though. It wouldn't matter whether we were negligent or not. If they
Really?
pay out the, no. If they pay out the claim, they pay out the claim. And they don't really charge us immediately. It sort of just gets added onto the invoice for next year.
Yeah.
So my point being this, is there's a reason, it's not just piling on. There's a reason we get additionally named insured, especially if we're talking alcohol. So that's the reasonings for it.
We're actually pretty lucky in Keizer. There's not too many parks that gets to have hard liquor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's
Rob
only,
Kistler found out I had a hard liquor at the amphitheater, he came unglued. I says, well, you were there at the city council meeting, and they approved it, and it went over his head.
Yeah,
said
he
this
missed
thought
it.
was
Mhm.
for beer and wine.
Right, I remember that.
City council actually allowed the hard liquor, so we're pretty lucky that we're able to do that.
How we get the real drunks
Yeah.
down there.
Well, and I hate to open this can of worms, but
Oh, go ahead.
I know, I'm sorry. The OLCC regulates marijuana now too.
Yes.
And earlier we said legal or illegal drugs, but I don't know. I don't really know what I'm asking. I'm just
Well, I
saying,
think
like,
what you're asking is if somebody lights up a joint, that violates it, that's igniting a drug.
Well, no.
If they imbibe it in a different way, that
Brownies?
would not be necessary, and it's otherwise legal, I don't think that would be directly a violation unless their further actions were a violation
Sure.
when they're impaired.
becomes
well,
something else.
and so some places do like several. Actually, before it was legal, I remember I went to Bend, and in a park right next to where I was staying, they had like a big, huge hemp festival,
Oh,
and
really?
it was
How handy.
very clear that people were doing drugs, probably not legally, but now it would have been, I think.
Except for the igniting part.
but you
Right.
can't.
Yeah, I don't know.
You can't do it. You can't smoke marijuana or anything.
Sure, but
in
you also
public.
can't drink alcohol like in public
Nope.
either. But
have to be in a
if you
bar.
get a special license, which some places are now doing, can you do that? Since the OSCC is regulating that kind of stuff, is that an option for us? And
So
do
if
we have
Clint-
to make
if
language
Clint-
regarding that?
If Clint wanted to have a concert and say,
That's what I'm
every-
asking.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can have
Okay,
gummy
what do we
bears
do,
and
Shannon?
brownies.
Well, unless you're talking about imbibing it without smoking it, I don't think there's a problem. I mean, it says you can't ignite any drugs, legal or otherwise, so you can't smoke a joint in the parks. If you're concerned about the marijuana brownies, theoretically, that would be allowed.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
But
Is there like,
But I thought it had to be on
So
personal
no
property.
brownies in the park.
great.
Well, Matt brings
put
up a
that
good
in.
point. Matt brings up a good point. I don't know and I should because I had to get involved with this marijuana thing on the council level with our regulations, but I don't really recall what the exact rule is, but I think you may be right. when you say you can't use marijuana in public, maybe that means you can't eat the brownie in public either. And if that's true, then that would be a violation. Not under our rules, but under state law.
Yeah, that you'd have to probably call the Attorney General and say,
I'm
yeah,
not,
is this-
I'm just not gonna worry about that one,
Yeah.
folks, sorry.
Well-
I mean,
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was like a provision we'd have to make for
Yeah.
festivals of that type, but it's
So
probably a
don't go to
bridge we'll
Dylan's
cross
brownie parties.
when we'll get to it.
But wouldn't that have to go through the board, just like Clinton did, to get hard alcohol approved? Or did you have to go through the board to get hard liquor approved?
Well, you have
Apply
to-
for a license.
It's-
I just went directly to the city council.
Yeah, it was the city council, okay. So that was, so technically, if somebody did want to do that, they would have to go through city council, and then they could decide whether or not they want to ban.
yeah, I
it.
suppose. I
legal?
doubt that it'd be an issue,
Okay,
because I don't think it'd be allowed under state law anyway.
okay.
OLCC
So-
Definitely not
struggles.
federal law, so
Cool, we don't need to make any amendments
The-
to that then.
no changes to that.
The next one, I'm gonna hand over to Matt to talk about drones. Because he and I had some conversations yesterday and today, and he has some solutions to this drone issue that I think will work. And I don't know if you want to give the background to what you and Kathy sent
Drone
me.
issues,
So,
not
so
drone,
under,
drone.
under section 16, I'm not making any proposal to change anything from no person to internal combustion engine. That can stay sort of as is. As it relates to unmanned aerial systems, not vehicles, or drones in the common nomenclature, there is very specific and very unspecific regulation from the Federal Aviation Administration as it relates to the regulation of UAS system usage in the country. Now, basically, what it boils down to is a drone can operate in any airspace that is non-controlled airspace, not a military training route, or not restricted airspace.
not
Meaning,
national parks.
well, national parks are
typically
considered
controlled airspace.
restricted airspace.
Okay.
They're designated restricted airspace under certain circumstances. So, and actually, that's one of the reasons that this is even brought up, because the national parks are getting in trouble because they banned it without authorization.
Oh, because I
So-
know there was the article on Crater Lake.
Right. So really what it boils down to, I think our body has essentially two options to consider. One would be to change the language, or recommend to change the language to something of the effect of any use of an unmanned aerial system drone, however powered, shall comply with the FAA regulations, applicable advisory circulars, and applicable Oregon revised statutes. So that would basically be the least restrictive way to look at drone operation on city property. Now, basically what it really boils down to is I can take my drone anywhere in the city and launch it if it's not controlled airspace, and the airspace itself is not regulated. So the city can own all the land at once, but as soon as that UAS system comes off of the ground, it's technically in the airspace in Keizer because it's not controlled airspace. In your charts, you have sort of your floor and your ceiling, your floor being ground level, AGL, and then your ceiling would be up to 400 feet, which is typically your drone height. So the city cannot regulate the airspace. Now, there is some opportunity for limitations under the statute that essentially can, so the local governments and local service districts may enforce ordinance that do not directly regulate drones. For example, may address under general provisions for nuisance, noise, wildlife disturbance, trespass by the operator, not the drone, and other drone specific or other non-drone specific ordinances. So, if it is the direction of this body to recommend a rule pertaining to the use of unmanned aerial systems, where the heck did I put it? Effectively, what would have to happen is this body would have to recommend something to the effect of A person shall not use a radio-controlled or any other device to affect the attitude of an unmanned aerial system while that person is on city-owned property. Any person that causes the attitude of an unmanned aerial system to change will be trespassing on city property. Permission may be obtained by the director and shall be in accordance with FAA regulations, advisory circulars, and applicable Oregon revised statutes prior to an operating affecting the attitude of an unmanned aerial system while on city property. So affecting the attitude of an aircraft essentially means as soon as the blade starts to turn, that is a surface of the aircraft, and so anytime you manipulate the surface of an aircraft, you're changing the attitude of the aircraft. And so it's technical jargon, but essential to basically saying as soon as they hit the go button and the propellers start turning on a helicopter or a jet or a propulsioned RC plane, they would be affecting the attitude of that unmanned aerial system. So so essentially, if we went that route, a person could essentially stand in Walsh Way, fly their drone all over Keizer Rapids Park in any manner that they. The frustrating part is there's sort of two schools of thought, right? As a Part 107, which is what I am, as a certified licensed drone operator, I have to operate my drone within a very, very stringent time regulations, and I can't be within a certain amount of feet of people and all this other stuff. Whereas if a non-licensed operator comes in or a hobbyist, they can essentially do it
Do whatever they want.
pretty much any way they want. They get in trouble and they go,
I didn't
sorry,
know
we
the
didn't know.
rules.
So, my attitude on it is we can suggest possibly best practices in terms of how to do things. But again, I think that's still sort of walking into delicate territory. But those are the sort of the paths forward. So either say, as I mentioned, drones may be operated on city property in accordance with FAA regulations, advisory circulars, and applicable Oregon revised statutes. Done. Or we go with this language that is more restrictive. I will tell you that it is. I will tell you that the city has less. The city will be more open to sort of establishing policy outside of the law as the law kind of catches up with technology. So, I mean, in the last 6 months, the drone policies and restrictions and all these things has advanced way slower than the actual systems itself. And so if we chose to go the path of saying shall be operated in accordance with FAA regulations and so on,
Those are
then
changing.
as those change, it would be incumbent on staff to be aware of that to some degree in terms of the compliance and sort of the regulation of that activity. Whereas if we go this route and try to sort of regulate the behavior portion of it, we may be running into a bit of a roadblock at some point to be determined when I don't know whether or not the Supreme Court case is settled on the hobby piece yet, but basically right now the only thing that a hobbyist would have to do is register their drone in the state of Oregon, and that's within a certain there's basically two criteria: a weight criteria and a speed criteria. So while some of these little guys don't weigh the actual amount, as fast as they're going, especially with these drone races and stuff, they could cause significant bodily harm to somebody. And so when they're out there doing the stunts like croquet and whatnot, that could be potentially hazardous to anybody out there. So I think either way, we could make a recommendation, but those are kind of it. So we regulate, yeah.
No, go ahead, finish.
So either follow the federal regulation and the state statutes, or we kind of go with, I think, what the spirit of the original recommendation was, which was you can't do it.
Ban them altogether, is that what
Right.
you're
And,
saying?
and that's, if I could,
Hey, I'm wondering, can we legally do that?
No.
well, the original language, Oh, and that's matching up, what section was that again?
16.
15 or 16?
Why couldn't we say it cannot originate from city property?
Well, if I could.
If it's in the air,
Yeah.
it's different, but.
So I talked to Matt yesterday and again right before this meeting, and my advice is to go with the more restrictive one because it makes it clear that you don't operate one. But let me make sure you understand. It says except in an area and at the times designated for such as a director. Because I would love to get into this drone thing myself personally, but I haven't had the time. And I think that probably in conjunction with talking to Robert, that at some point in the future, I don't know which park, and I don't know how it'd work, and I don't know if you're gonna have an air traffic jam with the drones, but there would be an area. If I thought there wouldn't be, that we wouldn't allow drones anywhere, anytime in the parks, I don't think that'd be right. But I think you can go with the more restrictive one, which is the word right before the meeting that you were using, Matt, that basically if I'm the operator and I'm physically on the park operating that's would be considered a trespass, just like because the city owns the park, just like somebody couldn't go in your backyard and stand there and operate the drone. Now, because of the way the law is, they can fly that drone over your house. I still don't understand how low they can fly it over your house, and there's a lot of issues there. But they can't stand in your backyard and operate it, and that's from the same perspective that I think that we would want to go. But it's up to you folks and ultimately the council to decide. If you go the less restrictive route,
The moving
I-
target.
well, it is,
It's
and
gonna-
and there is some restrictions there. They might not be able to do it anyway. Like Matt says, you can't do it over people and stuff. I mean, somebody would be taking a chance if they did that. But those rules are going to be in place regardless of what we do. I mean, the operators can be subject to those federal rules. So
You think
anyway,
we're on
It-
good legal standing saying you cannot originate.
I think what I said to Matt beforehand. If you folks don't have objections, we'll come back next meeting with some of this language that you talked about. That basically takes, and it isn't clear enough in my original language. I just tweaked the old language, just saying, hey, drones are around. I want to add drones to this too, like a model airplane. It needs to be a little more precise along the lines of what Matt's talking about. And the issue is really one of trespass. If you're going into the park and having a picnic, under my view, you're just a member of the public having a picnic. If you go on a picnic and then you're flying a drone and you're standing in the park, well, now you're trespassing, or at least subject to a trespass. And so that would allow us the leverage we need if it became a problem. And like I say, I think the drones thing is really neat. And I think that with the proper planning, you could have an area that would be operable and people would know, and so you'd have some
Well,
safety measures in place.
I do know that with the FAA, they are so far behind on this, and that's an issue because they don't have all the rules yet.
Right.
And if we went just with them, then trying to keep up with all their rules, because they may change every month,
Right.
who knows? So I like the more restrictive. But when you talk you're using trespassing.
That's the
on
word that
legal
Matt was using
sense.
because that word jives with what the feds allow us to do. Basically,
Okay.
the feds are saying, you guys don't have the right. You're preempted, and the state's preempted in this area. And it's strong preemption language, the language Matt sent me, which I kind of knew about the concept, Matt, but I didn't know that exact language. And it is very strong preemption. But there is this exception to that preemption where they preempt us that would allow us to say, yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't stand, you could stand in the park if we regulate against it. So I know we're on firm legal ground to do it.
So if somebody on Rafael,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, or 15th, or
Right.
whenever,
That's where I was
they
headed.
have their drone, they fly it over the park.
Can't regulate
Can't
that.
do nothing.
Right, okay.
Well,
And
but-
I understand
That-
that.
I mean,
But-
it still might be illegal, but we can't regulate that.
They would be in
wouldn't
violation.
Be a line of sight.
They would be, yeah, they'd be outside a line of sight and they'd be in violation of the FAA regulations. So
Well,
it,
not-
Somebody could, excuse me, but somebody who backs up to the park on
Right.
15th, they could stand in their backyard as long as they could view it
Bet.
and theoretically operate it. We can't do anything about that.
We
And
do
I
that in
knew
the
that.
home park.
Because we don't own the air.
Right.
Yeah.
and the struggle is essentially the plain language of ORS 836-0005 basically states that because an unmanned aircraft launches and lands from any area, that area functions as an airport, which is really kind of weird. And so,
Yeah.
That is really weird.
no, and it is. And so, what we've been hearing from, and I'm putting my other life hat on, there are municipalities that are adopting essentially exclusive use drone areas. And I know that one municipality just east of the Cascades just got in trouble for that because it is a non-regulated use.
Ben,
No,
Redmond?
not telling tales out of school,
Oh.
but
Does it matter?
I mean, I think watching as fast as this is happening, right now the state of Oregon is under what's called the potential to become a major player in terms of the policy and processes for drones moving forward. I know that we have many stakeholders from municipalities to police services and other things of that nature. If I were a gambling man, I would venture to say that if we choose to go the more restrictive route, we will be revisiting this very soon. Simply
Because the rules are gonna change?
because they're changing so fast, yes.
If we go the more restrictive?
If we go the more restrictive route, we will be revisiting this soon.
What's the goal of having this
Safety.
for park visitors?
Yes.
Safety and
for-
annoyance.
Yeah, and there's an aesthetic issue too, right? And
But do
here's
we
the
do that-
general, pardon?
Do we do safety and aesthetic in other regulations?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, do
Noise.
we use safety and aesthetics?
Yeah, I just wanted, this was like, so specific about planes,
Well, yeah, it's,
aerial
Right.
whatevers.
So the problem is ORS 837-385 preempts local governments and local service districts from enacting an ordinance or resolution that regulates the ownership or operation of an unmanned aerial system or otherwise engage in the regulation or ownership of that UAS system. So safety, all those things. The statutes right now are so permissive, again, because the country doesn't know what they don't know as it relates to this particular
Right.
technology.
I understand that, but what I was trying to get at is, we're restricting a specific type of activity to protect other park visitors? Is that what we're trying to do?
right.
Is that something that we do as a regulation for
Well,
parks?
it's just,
Well, look at the
this
next
is,
item for golf.
look at the one right underneath it. It's golf. You don't want somebody hitting a golf ball in a park, I don't think. You know, and the other ones have to
I know
do
it's cool,
with
they're supposed to.
Well, smoking was a
internal
safety
combustion
regulation.
engine, smoking. I mean, it's safety and aesthetics.
Okay.
And so,
Can we
the-
put
the-
that in here?
Nope.
This is a safety issue?
we typically wouldn't put the reasoning for it in there because then we would be forced to put the reasoning behind every
Well,
other
then-
provision.
And then people are gonna wanna argue with the reasoning.
Right. S- Contrary to what Matt says, I think generally, because this is the same thing I argued with the sign code too, but I mean, it's a policy question for you folks and for the council. It's harder to make something less restrictive and then go restrictive.
Right.
It's easier to make stuff restrictive and then if you need to loosen it up.
And
And
you
just the
always-
way
and
of the
you-
world. And like I said, I don't think that there's gonna be a problem. I think that unfortunately for Bill and maybe Robert, you guys are gonna have to address this sooner than you might think because there's gonna be some demand like, hey, well, why can't I use my drone? Well, you know what? Maybe you can use your drone. Let's talk about the times. Let's talk about the location. Let's talk about some simple safety measures. And there would be a provision for that. And I don't want to presume where they would be. But I don't think you'd want to do it in, Northview Park or one of the smaller parks. I mean, I think there would be a lot of thought into what those times and areas would be. But if you don't do that and you don't make it restrictive, then basically like Matt says, somebody might be violating federal law if they operate it,
But
but
then we
they might
don't-
not be.
We don't have
And
jurisdiction.
We don't have that jurisdiction, though.
Correct.
we, if we do the less restrictive route, what Matt is suggesting is option A, let's call it, it's basically just saying, you can't operate a drone unless you're in compliance with federal law, period. Well, what that would mean is you might be able to operate a drone, and it might be inconvenient, and it might be unsafe, but you'd still be within the federal law. What I'm suggesting is that maybe we don't want to have it that open. But again, that's a policy question for you folks. If you feel like, you know, we'll let the feds decide what they think is safe, and we're not concerned about the aesthetics with regard to, and I know, my understanding is they don't make a lot of noise. So,
Size, yeah.
yeah, and so, I mean, and so that's fine too. I mean, Matt brought up a good point in last week when the packet came out. He sent me an email, or Kathy did, or both of you did. And it is, we will have to change the language one way or the other. The only question is between those two options.
Well,
Something-
let me get make sure I understand the restrictive one. The restrictive option is you cannot be standing on city property operating
No.
a drone.
That would be my more restrictive one unless it's authorized as an area and times that we would have it.
Right.
The language that you talked
have to
about
have
before
a-
the meeting with regard to trespass.
So essentially, the rule would establish a trespassing scenario, and the trespassing scenario would be that they have a device that could affect the attitude of an unmanned aerial system. So, again, because the operation of a drone itself cannot be, so operating, right, cannot be regulated. But you can, it's sort of getting there without,
I know what you're saying.
Jim, sorry, but
No, go ahead.
so for the respect of all of our times, can we put this as a new item or something in the next agenda to discuss? Because this is something that's like way over my head, and I think we all have a lot
I
of
think
questions.
probably, I think you're right. I think probably the best thing is to do is I'll just put both options in the next draft.
Yeah, so we
And
can consider
then
them.
then you can actually read it
Yeah.
and you know, digest it a bit
Yeah,
rather
'cause
than trying, because it's hard.
It's
It's
kind of
hard to
hard, and
listen
Matt's
to
bringing
it
up a
without
lot of
reading it.
points and all these ordinances. I think it would be great to be able to see it on paper and
So
maybe
we'll,
have time to
unless there's
discuss.
objection, we'll go ahead and do that. We'll put both
Shannon,
options
are
in.
you gonna be at the next meeting then?
Yes. And just
Because
while
I-
I'm at it, to confirm, that's May 12, second Tuesday?
No, it's June.
I'm sorry, June 12 is what I meant.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
meeting this Saturday, yeah.
Okay.
No pun intended over my head.
And again, my question, or my concern is, and Matt, you say we'll be changing it soon if we do it. I still don't understand that the city can't make a rule that says you can't originate a drone from city property. Any more than we restrict other things.
The FAA says we can't.
Yeah,
The
it's,
FAA gets to decide.
Well, I don't think they should.
Well,
Take it up with them.
So
Well,
I guess my concern, Shannon, is, and I'm not gonna be here the June meeting, but my concern is, and which is always your concern, what legal base we have to do this.
Right.
And I don't wanna I also agree that it's easier to, add a restriction than to do it later.
Well,
Because then you. get
don't
people
worry. I'll have
interested.
more time to get into this, so I'll double check some sources and take the information that Matt has, and we'll come back and lay it out in a little more detail.
Okay.
So the other section that we had, at least that I put in the staff report, and you folks may have some other questions, is the fine amounts, which we don't really need to address tonight unless you have specific questions. You can see there, I lost my place. It was really weird because it was originally taken, I think, this version was from Marion County's ordinances. I am thinking that we just make it simpler but I started looking at all the different kinds of violations, and I don't think you want to have just one fine. And I don't think, and I know the court doesn't like this, municipal court, you don't want to have this huge range where the judge is like, has too much latitude. So what I did there is, and I randomly did that, I didn't even try to check with Robert or Bill on it, I just threw them in there. I don't have a concern with what you do. The main thing that I did is put, those dollar amounts are what's called base fines, which are maximum fines, and I changed the end where it says, well, let me find it again. There it is, subsection 22, it's on the next last, well, almost, page 29. The base fine amount is the maximum fine. The minimum fine, I changed to 50% of the base fine instead of 75%. That allows the judge to have more latitude. So if somebody has a $200 fine, that's kind of a lot of money to, a lot of people, and maybe it wasn't that egregious. Instead of,
If
150, he could reduce
can't
it
do
to
the
100.
time, don't do the crime.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So, in any event, I can't remember how many values I put in there, 3 or 4. I think 100, 200. Some of them seem really serious, like water pollution and damaging property and intentional stuff. I'm looking at a little higher. Those are the fine amounts I had. If you folks have any suggestions on those, that's,
Are these consistent with the county?
I did not double check the county bill.
So where did
Jim.
you come up with the numbers?
I made them up.
He said that already.
I know,
I have one piece of input. As I was going through there and looking at the different class felonies, it seemed like in some instances it was a class C or or whatever. Misdemeanor.
Violations, actually,
Right,
they're not
violation.
misdemeanors.
Anyway, and it was 150, and in another instance it was a class C. and
Yeah,
it was
no, I
200.
didn't rely on any of that.
Yeah,
I
so
just went on
I would
judgment
like
call.
to be consistent with the class
And
violation.
that would be fine too.
Well, like water pollution, that comes under the DEQ, doesn't it? Don't they have?
Well,
certain-
it'd be a violation of DEQ too, but
But don't they have, wouldn't we want to be consistent with them? Or does that get too complicated? Because I know they have I've wondered on the bridge project, what, they have to do to protect the creek. I mean, DEQ would want to know that. And that's not a question for tonight, but something I was puzzled about. I guess what I'm saying, Shannon, I appreciate you making these numbers up, but I'm kind of wondering if,
How tired you were when you did that.
if we want to look at what the county does, what
Okay.
DEQ does, what, otherwise we might be shorting ourselves, and we also might be charging people more than deserved. I don't know.
I'll see if I can figure out
I know that's a
the
lot of work to
counties
look
or
this stuff
Salem's
up.
for that matter.
Paid good money. Yes.
Because I would like to make it more simple, but the more I looked at it, some of these are really minor and some of them are not minor.
Right.
And so I didn't want to make it just a flat
A
amount
water
for all of
pollution,
them.
if somebody goes down there and dumps a whole bunch of oil at the boat ramp, that's a pretty serious.
Right. All right, I'll review those and come back with further information at the
Okay.
next meeting then.
And consistency. Consistency with the violation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that,
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, you're welcome.
is that all we have on that? I think we were right
Yeah,
at the end.
unless you have specific
it.
questions on anything else on the regulations?
Questions?
I think that they said that they had to report that they were voting themselves in for some volunteer duty or something.
Okay. Well, now we're gonna have parks reports. We're running late, so let's try and be as quick as you can. Zyra, you're gonna Claggett Creek and Wallace House?
Okay, so I've been out of state for like
Shannon.
half a month, so I haven't really had much of an opportunity to be out and about. But I did go to Claggett Creek Park, which is like right behind my house, and I did, as you guys probably know, there's a lot of construction going on the south side of the park, and so that's definitely I just have questions about, once they're done with that construction, what is our plan on making sure that everything goes kind of back to normal? I know that they also cut trees by that area, and so that kind of was a little messy when you were like walking by that side of the parking lot. So just trying to figure out what the plan is after the construction is over, as far as that side of the park goes.
You want me to?
I'm
answer?
not sure if,
Well,
it
I
doesn't
could
need
just
to be
give you
addressed
guys-
today. It's just, you could always email me. But
I can give you a
just
quick update.
some of my observations.
The construction will continue about into this coming October. By then, the crew, Caney, should be wrapped up, and they'll have everything cleaned up, out of the way, and the park will be open. It's still open, but it'll be completely open. The road will be reopened and everything. I'm sorry, I'm having.
You can
some
still
water.
access, you can still,
On the other side of the
ac-
park.
can you, well, let me, yeah.
Yes, you can still
it from-
access it with your vehicle from Dearborn.
Right.
But you have to go around a barricade. The road closed sign does not actually begin until at the parking lot. So
you can come.
that's
you
for
can get into
safety of the
parking lot.
workers that are working there.
Okay. And no
Yes,
no
you
one
can
really
access your
has
vehicle
done
at the
that,
park.
I've noticed. But
What was that?
and I haven't seen any cars actually go past the barricade.
I've been down there every day, and I've seen lots
Okay.
during the
I
day.
haven't seen any.
Okay.
Local access only, isn't it?
Well, but
There's not a sign that says local access only. There's actually no sign on them.
Okay. All right.
Uh,
Sorry.
Anyways,
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you. And well, I'm pretty new to this, guy, so I do have a lot of questions. So I might just follow up with you afterwards because I received the Keizer's Parks Master Plan improvement, and it was just kind of a list, so it wasn't very detailed. So I will just kind of go over my observations and then maybe follow up with you if I have any
Yeah.
further questions. And then I just saw that there's some limbs by the basketball field that just kind of fell off the trees. They may need to be picked up.
At Wallace House?
I'm sorry.
At Claggett?
At Claggett Creek Park. Yeah, I'm on Claggett Creek Park. Other than that, I really didn't see anything else with the park. There's definitely is a list of improvements, but none of them have been checked off yet, and so just keeping an eye out for that is what I've been doing. I also went to the Wallace House Park, and I've never been there before. Today was my first day going, and so I didn't know where the parking lot was. So I did come in through the the north side of the park, and so I know there was new accessible parking lots that were made there, but the actual parking lot for people who don't need accessible parking is more to the right. So it would be kind
the
of
north.
nice if there was like a sign saying parking that way, if that is a possibility. It's just a recommendation, just a sign that points towards the parking lot.
Okay. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and then just the garbage can near the little park area, the kids' play area is really beat up. It just looks like someone kicked it, and it's kind of dented from the side.
Oh, the garbage can?
Yeah.
We have. There's a few garbage cans throughout the city that
I know.
I don't know why
they're-
kids pick on them.
They're just kind
There will
of.
be 2 or 3 years where that can gets kicked and kicked and kicked, and then all of a sudden the problem goes away. Probably because the kid got older or moved away or whatever.
Yeah.
So
And then I did see that on the improvement list, it said that they were gonna get new signs or, hold on, where did it go? Updated park signs, but the parking lot sign is not updated. It still looks pretty.
So when they
beat
say updated park signs, are actually the main thing that they're referring to there is the park entry sign that's actually saying what park it is.
Okay.
And that did happen.
So the rules one, that's not part of being updated, because where it says the park rules on the parking lot, it just looks really, like it's just really stained, and you can kind of it's starting to fade away.
Some of those signs we've recognized they need changed, and I knew this whole parks ordinance thing was coming up, and so because of that, we've chosen not to get new signs made, because if we change this ordinance, then it's probably going to change the number that's on the sign, or we might be changing some of the rules that are on the sign. So I want to make sure that this process gets completed before we go ahead and change out any of those signs.
Thank you for the update. And other than that, those are just really all of my updates on the parks. And they look good. The grass is mowed and everything else. There's no trash or anything like that. So, yeah,
Excellent.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you for doing your homework.
You're welcome.
Dylan,
Yes.
did you do your homework?
Despite my typical track record on doing homework, I did. I walked down to Palmacia today, and that is still a park in our town.
Sort of.
Willamette Manor. We got an email, at least Robin and I did, last week about the tennis court there.
Yeah.
And I was there today, and it looks like not like a new tennis court, but I didn't see like any noticeable cracks or anything of any danger.
Did they get
But
fixed?
an update on that from Robert's email. No, I don't think they did get fixed. Is that they will be fixed later this year. Is that right, Robert?
Yes.
So they were okay
On the
now
list.
for your tennis skills.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it looked fine. I could
Yeah.
play tennis on it, but I'm not an expert. There were like visible cracks, but not dangerous or even
Like-
like
They're not like
interfering.
what I have photos of that court before it was repaired, and there was cracks. I literally have pictures of my
Yes.
thumb in the cracks.
I remember that.
with
and I,
like uneven. Yeah.
I
So
played
compared
it
to
on-
that, it looks pretty good.
Yes, exactly. So that was my reference. Was I was there a couple years
Yeah.
ago when it was
A
really
f- a f-
bad.
A few of the cracks are returning, and there's a small portion, and I say small portion because when you look at the big picture of what took place down there, we had 540 lineal feet of crack repaired, and some of those cracks were up to 1.25 inches wide. And so when you look at the big picture of the cracks that have returned, which we knew some would return because it's Oregon and our temperatures are constantly changing. We have one day it's cold and rainy, and the next day it's hot and sunny, and that's hard on hard surfaces like that. But we knew a few of the cracks would return, and those cracks I plan on having addressed this summer, and it's going to be kind of a continued maintenance item that'll have to take place down there on that court, unless we choose to eventually shell out the big bucks and completely demo that court and redo it.
I also noticed that the fencing has, at least sometime in the last couple of years, the fencing around that court has been replaced or repaired.
Repaired.
Okay. Well, it used to be pretty bad also.
Yeah.
We're talking like 5 years ago that I remember it being pretty bad.
Mhm.
But other than that, the park looks good. It seems fine.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I got to take a look at Sunset last week, and fortunately, Daryl Richardson's back home from his winter vacation, and so he's been out. He goes out and mows and does all sorts of stuff, and the park's looking good. And it's every time I'm there, there's people down there. They
Yep.
come in and out, and then today I was going to go to Northview, and I've been short an employee, and I didn't have time to get over there, so I didn't get all my homework done. I should have done it before. But when the question I have on Northview is where does it fall in the hierarchy of getting the improvements down there, fixing some stuff?
So the half court, we'll
Right.
call it, we plan on getting that replaced this next fiscal year, so it could take place. That's something I've actually been working on right now is getting some companies involved that do specialize in that type of repair and or replacement. In that case, it's going to be replacement of the court. And then we'll look at scheduling and see if it's going to fall in place either this summer or the very first part of next summer.
Okay, good. All right. So our other two members aren't here to report, so we'll go to staff report. Back to
All right.
you, Robert.
Two things for you. I just want to let everybody know that we are running 100% at full staff right now. We have our 4 employees and we have 2 temps on board. So there's actually 6 bodies in parks right now, and it's pretty awesome because that's never happened before. And I hope
You having trouble with names? I mean, you never had to remember more than 1 or 2 names.
with the name. Oh no, not yet. Not yet. Other than we have like Matt's name is Matt. I hired a Matt, and there's another Matt in the water department. So you say the word Matt, and it's like everybody looks at you like, Matt who? You know, like which one? No, but other than that, everything's going good. And I just want to give a quick update on the Meadows Place structure. I got word from the contractor that excavation and demo should start this month sometime. So we're shooting for the last 2 weeks of May. Could definitely be the end of May, but the month of May, that project should start, and it will. It's not going to close the entire park down, but it's going to close the main focus of the park for the majority of the summer. Just the
And
size of the project.
neighbors all know all this.
A lot of the neighbors know.
Okay.
Yeah, most of which were given the opportunity to come speak at the public meeting and give us their input, and so yeah, they know the process is coming.
Are you gonna bring the final concept so we can see it?
I can, yeah,
It'd be kinda
absolutely.
cool. Maybe post it on the city page. I don't know if you want to do that and get all the fun comments or anything, but
Yeah.
it might just be.
It'll actually be in Keizer Monthly. Is that the magazine? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Soon.
I just, from my perspective, I think that the city has done a much better job telling their own story. And I think that the sooner and the more often you can get this information out there for people to be exposed to and digest, I think the
Yeah.
less, what's this?
Yeah.
Well, if I can add, and the concept of allowing the neighbors to be the ones that really said, this is what we want.
Yeah.
Did that concept kind of come from the big toy?
I think part of it did,
Yeah.
but the other part was, those are the people paying their fee, and we want to make sure that the ones that are paying the fee get
Right.
to speak.
Well, I think that's largely part of the process moving forward in terms of the prioritization and looking at this. As I recall, I think we expect to have a certain amount of participation on many of the large capital projects.
Mhm.
So as we move forward with the sports courts, whether it's Claggett or wherever, some of those conversations are going to be necessary to really make sure that the people, us that are paying this fee, are really getting what we want out of it, not just, well, this is what we've always had a pickleball court, and this is what it's actually pickleball is new. What's a sport nobody plays anymore? I don't know. This has always been this, so we're going to place it in kind. Whereas maybe folks are coming back and saying, no, we could maybe look at doing something a little bit different.
Well,
I mean, for the most part, it's going to be in kind, but
I like the idea of involving the neighbors that much. I mean, it creates an ownership.
Mm-hmm.
It creates the idea of being part of the process.
Yeah.
And I just think it's great. And you guys did a great job with that.
Thanks.
agreed.
That's all I had.
Okay. Thank you.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What about the burning of the stuff that was supposed to happen at the end of April?
Yeah.
Forgot about
Sorry.
that.
I don't have an update for you other than the farmer that we've been in contact with on this whole process has not 100% committed to farming the land. Last time I knew.
What's that have to do
And
with the
until
burning?
that happens,
Because if it's not,
we're not going to burn.
If it's not leased out, you can't burn it,
Right,
right? Because it's
right.
not
So
farming.
it's still being worked on.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry for the delay on that because I
So
was
now we're
told it
gonna
would
have
happen
rats in the park. Yeah.
by the date that I gave you last time, and it didn't. But that was out of my control. So that was just what I had.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Councilman, what do you have for us?
Thank you very much. A few things to report. We got done with budget. And that was actually, it was a pretty smooth process this year.
Always is.
Tim Wood does a very good job of explaining and a great participation. There's a few things we have to fine tune, but in general, it's basically done. This last meeting, we discussed some of the management agreement with KLL, and we'll fine tune that. Where's Clint?
Oh, he had to go.
Oh, he has to go. Okay, well, anyway, there's a couple things that they requested that we're gonna work on in terms of the contract or the agreement. A couple other things that I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about was our fire district 70 years of service coming up on Monday. And that's, we're very fortunate to have a very, I worked alongside them for 20-something years, and they are amazing. And the history behind our fire department is very interesting, if you guys know it. Jim, you probably know a lot of it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that old pop machine they used to have in the 70s was kind of cool. Anyway, so we're going to celebrate that, and we'll hopefully be there. Also, Mother's Day coming up. They have that great breakfast. It's been going on for so long, and I'm not kidding you. It is a good breakfast. It's not.
yeah.
Very
It's not just a regular, like I used to have the utility
Bacon.
breakfast. Yeah.
They take great pride.
They put some, and these are real good hotcakes and ham and everything. They don't mess around. And there's always a line, so get there early, take your mother, and have a good time. Last but not least, the other thing we're having this week, we're having our first annual Latino reception, graduation, right here in this building on Thursday night. Who's going to invite you? And that should be very nice. We have a couple of, well, actually quite a few kids that we're honoring. One of them is actually going to Stanford, and I
was going to go to Stanford, but
that was yeah. Right.
I decided not to.
Okay. You ended up going to OSU, didn't you, a little bit?
No, I went
Stanford,
to
Oregon.
Western Oregon, but it was Stanford or Harvard, and I could do that.
That's pretty much all we had. I just wanted to let you guys know that, especially, and Robert, I want to let you know that, there's been a tremendous, I'm kind of a parks nerd, in my own way. I worked in one for 16 years, for many of you know that, Jim.
Well,
And-
you look over your park.
Yeah,
It's
well, I
out
kind of,
right out your
yeah.
front door.
It's funny you said that because somebody told me the other day that our park is always kept pretty clean. They know they said since I moved in, the park's kept clean. They do a lot better, and I like to tell them that
Timing is everything.
at 6 o'clock in the morning, every morning, somebody and their dog walks over there and does all the garbage. And we help out a little bit. But anyway, I've noticed a lot of difference in the mowing, the upkeep of the park. I know it's early, and it's not even, but I also had a neighbor make a comment about it, and I thought that was kind of cool. They're doing a great job, and our soccer field over there, Mr. Fry does a wonderful job of keeping that up. And kids are starting to play in it, and I've seen some people playing it. For a while, it was like just sitting there, and once in a while you see a dad and a daughter out there, but now they're actually practicing. People are practicing out there. I know because I live right in the 50-yard line there, you know that, and we walk that park every day for 12 years, and it's been, we are going to need those improvements so that path is really beat up, and with the water, it makes it slippery with the moss and stuff. Yeah. So I've been kind of watching over that, and in general, it's pretty well, I can see the smokers are back, because every morning I know where the Marlboro smokers are, but it's okay. It kind of keeps me busy, and it's been kind of interesting watching the evolution of this park. You're doing a good job, and Lawson does a great job mowing it. He picked it up really fast.
Good.
So he's got it down. I've been watching him. So anyway, that's all I got, and thanks for all your hard work. I've heard enough about drones tonight, though. I'll tell you.
Donna?
I just wanted to add a little bit more information on the 70th anniversary. There is going to be a public reception on the 14th at the fire hall, and everybody's welcome to come in. We're going to have lots of memorabilia. We're going to have a lot of the older volunteers with all of the good stories who will be there. Refreshments as well. And so I hope that anybody that has a chance could come and bring their kids.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Matt?
Just a couple quick items. So April 21st, the Clyde Creek Watershed Council hosted the Soggy Day in the Park. Ended up being anything but a soggy day in the
It
park.
was a gorgeous day.
It's one of those things, we did a little bit of a service project in the morning. We put out compost around the trees. But initially, it kind of started out as we were going to celebrate the opening of the Arboretum. And it sort of morphed into the watershed's ability to say thank you, because we're always asking for help. We're always asking for volunteers. We anticipated about 50 people. We were way surprised that we probably had over 300 for the day. Willamette Valley Appliance had sponsored a bounce house obstacle course with a big slide. Adams Rib Smokehouse came out and donated 250 hot dogs. They cooked all of them. Mark Callier and his wife donated their jet boat. And so CERT was organizing the water safety courses. They were doing the boat rides. It was a lot of fun. And it was just a really big event. And we really appreciated the opportunity for folks to come out and participate in that free, mostly all-day event. And I got to brag on Robert a little bit. He came out and spent 3.5 hours, more or less bent over inside of a backhoe, teaching our young people how to operate the backhoe. And so towards the last probably about half an hour, I kept giving Robert the puppy dog eyes because we'd have a couple, one or two little guys show up and wanting to do it. And, you know, Robert and I both have young kids, and so we don't want to say no to little ones. And so he stayed through it, and he was the last event, and I just really appreciate that. And I'd also like to brag just a little bit on the changes that we've already seen in the increased services. So we have the 2 new staff. They're getting on board. From what I heard at the budget meeting was it used to take about a full week to get through the entire park system for mowing, and they're doing it in less than 2 days now. So huge shout out to all the work that Robert and his team are doing. We've already seen the value added benefit of this, and I'm encouraged to see the continuing efforts there. This Saturday, Clay Creek Watershed Council is hosting a cleanup event at Keizer Rapids Park. This will be largely going around and picking up all the loose sticks in the orchard. We're going to try to get them as close to the burn piles as possible. You know, the sticks have become a fun thing for the kids. They're making forts and stuff out of them, so we're going to hopefully try to discourage that. But that'll be an event starting 9 a.m. on Saturday. So if you want to come out and be part of that, bring gloves and shoes you don't mind getting muddy, and we'll walk around and pick up sticks. But again, huge shout out to Robert and his guys. Excellent extra efforts so far.
Use of funding, excellent.
I'm sorry?
Excellent use of funding.
Yes, great job, guys. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anybody else? Anything? You'd like to add anything?
One of the things, since David's not here, do you want to pick somebody else to do the report to council?
Anybody volunteer to do that?
I did not.
Wait a minute, let's see who's next.
See who's next.
Never done this before, so I won't volunteer myself.
Oh, well, that's not him.
You just go to
I'll do it.
council
Okay.
meeting.
Yeah.
What?
Jim, oh, you're not gonna, can you do it, Jim? You're supposed to do it in July. We could switch you.
May 21st?
I guess.
Actually,
I don't
no,
know.
no,
When is my turn?
it's on your, you are, in
Oh.
January.
I'm in January?
Yeah.
Oh, still
Chris
till
is
next year.
actually scheduled for the June meeting.
Clint was mostly
Oh,
here. I
I'm
mean,
not going to be here, Debbie.
You,
No, I'm going to be in Washington.
maybe,
Hold
let
on.
me see if I can get Clint to report. He just missed the last 10 minutes.
If Clint doesn't want to, I'll do it.
I can do it.
You can? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can do that. Why don't we just, you wanna flip a coin?
No, Dylan wants it. He said, I heard him.
Yeah, Dylan's a good guy.
Okay, and Debbie, I won't be here for the June
I've got
meeting.
you. Did I?
Okay.
Sorry, did I hear you say you weren't gonna be here either?
No, I'll be here. I was just curious about when I have to report to the council. It's not till January, so
It's fun.
if Dylan can't go, I'll go too.
That's at 7 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll send you
Scary.
the
Soon.
draft document.
Thank you.
I've never been to
Okay,
the
if
meeting.
nobody has anything else, adjourn the meeting. It is 7:40.
Okay.
You adjourn.